Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Happy that you're here joining us for our next installment of our second millennia of Christendom. I don't know, what have I called it? 1,000 years of global Christian history? I guess that's kind of the title, but something like that. We'll just say the year 1000 to present day is what we're covering this year. And today we're in the 13th century. And we are going to talk about a little guy. Actually, he was reportedly a gigantic guy, St. Thomas Aquinas. Somebody told me once that at the end of his life he was so large and heavy that monks actually picked up his chair and carried him around because he wasn't able to walk under his own power. I don't know if that's true. I also know the last year of his life he was very ill, and he even hit his head on a branch when he was riding his horse, and he just kind of was ill and sick. So maybe that's why people carried him, not because he was so large. But anyways, let's before I dive into more legends about St. Thomas, let's open with a prayer, and then we'll get into it. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have blessed the church with brilliant minds as astute as St. Thomas Aquinas of the Middle Ages. And though we will never advance to the level of intelligence or of sanctity of St. Thomas, we pray, God, that he would nevertheless be an inspiration to us, and that you'd strengthen our faith and sharpen our intellect for the path of Christian discipleship. And guide our days. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Amen. So today we're talking about Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas is from his family castle Aquino. So his name means Thomas of Aquino, or that's where his name comes from. And we're going to be talking about his 5 ways, which are popularly called the 5 arguments for God's existence. So today there's going to be a lot of philosophy. Today isn't necessarily convoluted and complicated, like, talking about the events around the Fourth Crusade or something like that. But today we're going to have to do a lot of thinking. We'll have to put our thinking caps on. Because this is going to be the most kind of philosophy and metaphysics we've yet had in a Tuesday morning class. So we'll see how it goes. That painting of St. Thomas is by Fra Bartolomeo, 1472 to 1517. That's when Bartolomeo lived. And he was a high Renaissance artist and was also a Dominican friar. And so St. Thomas was a Dominican friar. Bartolomeo was a Dominican friar who lived a couple hundred years after him. But he painted maybe one of his heroes in a fresco. I'm not sure where that painting currently is, but it's a really great depiction, I think, of a medieval man. You can look in his eyes and just sort of, tell, you can kind of see what he's thinking, or
almost looks like a Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, he looks like Mickey Mouse. Yeah, that's exactly what he's going for.
Yeah, with the ears.
I was going to talk more about Bartolomeo, but I guess I won't, Lucy. Bartolomeo was if you maybe has anyone ever heard of him or seen his art in a museum or anything? Lisa and I saw many of his paintings in Italy, and his work is just so pure and holy and sanctified. You look at it and you can just tell that Bartolomeo himself loved the Lord and painted with a holiness and with a sanctity. And that's how he depicted Thomas Aquinas, I think, just as a very gentle, humble man wearing this hood of his Dominican outfit. So just really like that. Scriptural starting places. So we're going to be talking about, as Lutherans would say, first article issues about God the Father, and particularly God's existence, and how we can demonstrate that. So I think Psalm 19:1 would be a good place to start, if someone would read that.
The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork.
So it's not as if God is so hidden that men and women have to be inspired to know that he exists, or to know that God is. Even pagans, non-believers can look at the heavens and look at the earth and look at the pattern of a leaf look at the Milky Way galaxy and say, wow, there's something more out there. And whatever is out there is an engineer and a careful designer. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that before, looking at the nighttime sky or looking at a fossil or looking at the Grand Canyon or wherever you are, just to see the natural wonder and know that God is. You don't necessarily know that God sent his Son to our earth, incarnate in our human flesh. You don't know that God is omniscient. You don't know that God has given his scriptures to the church, right, through prophets and apostles. You don't know that God is triune. One way that St. Thomas put it is that if someone comes behind your back and touches you, you know that you've been touched by a person. You don't know who that person is. I think that's a really good way of thinking about kind of the heavens and the handiwork of God. You know that God is. You don't know him, though. Just as if someone comes up and touches me on my back, I'd probably say it was Linda messing with me. But
And it probably was.
And it probably was. But generally speaking, if you are somewhere and someone touches you, you know that you have been touched by a person. You don't know the person. I forget where I read that, but I think that's a great image for this. And then let's go to the prophet Isaiah 40, verse 26.
Lift your eyes and look to the heavens, who created all these. He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing.
Love that. Another beautiful passage. Sort of echoes the psalmist, but is even a little more poetic, I would say. You might even be able to say that by our observations, we can say, whoever did all this is definitely powerful. Someone who can play with galaxies, someone who made Leviathan. Obviously, this God is a God of power, a God who has, like I said, an engineering mind, a God who is creative, a God who can create. We don't yet know him personally yet. And then, famously, Romans 1, 18 through 21. We'll go to the New Testament and see what Paul has to say about our natural knowledge of God.
The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse.
Thank you. So Paul is saying his eternal power and his divine nature.
Oh, I guess you went to 21 also. It says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened.
Thank you. So his eternal power and divine nature are, how does Paul say it, are clearly perceived. Clearly perceived. We could say clearly seen. And then we might say, by all. If the most wicked of men perceive God's eternal attributes, then the holiest of men perceive his attributes as well. But to see his attributes, to see the power of God, or that a God, a divine being, has fashioned all of this, isn't yet to say that we know him, or that we have come to love him or come to trust in him. We just know that he is.
If you look at every society that there's ever been, they all worship some kind of a god.
Yeah.
So that known by all, that's there. It's in their mind or heart or somewhere that there's a God, something stronger than me.
Right. Yeah. Virtually every. Yep. Go back to the earliest humans. Go back to Native American cultures. Look at Buddhism and Hinduism. I mean, Buddhism is different. Buddhism is kind of an atheistic religion, but Hinduism certainly. There's always this acceptance that there are divine beings or a divine being higher than us responsible for what we see. So really, this point of Paul's in Romans 1 is sort of what we're going to just dive into today. It's what Thomas unpacks in the course of his career. I hope you'll find it interesting as I do. So, how many have you all heard of? You've heard of St. Thomas because of the college, I'm guessing, and you know that he is. But I'm guessing, just like maybe a lot of Catholic saints, you're not as acquainted with his thought or with his life. So he was a Dominican priest. The Dominicans were interesting. Like the Franciscans, the Dominicans also arose at this time in the Middle Ages. I think Dominic, I'm going to get this wrong. I want to say Dominic died in like 1220, I think. And the Dominicans are named after Dominic. St. Francis of Assisi died in late 12th century, and the Franciscans are named after St. Francis of Assisi, who I also know you've heard of. So the Franciscans and the Dominicans were different than the Benedictines or the Cistercians or these other monastic groups because they did not take a vow of like stability. They didn't have a house that they lived in, and then they did all their work and all their praying there, and they lived there all their days, and then they died there. If you go to a Benedictine monastery today, there will be old men at the monastery, and they've been there for years, and they're going to die there, and that is their community, that is their family. But the Franciscans and Dominicans were travelers. So the Franciscans famously were like the blessed poor of the Gospels. They owned nothing except their famous brown cloaks. And they traveled around and begged for their food and for their shelter, like St. Thomas himself did. And they preached. Or not, they didn't preach. They gave alms and they built churches and they were missionaries. The Dominicans were known as the preachers. So the Dominicans traveled around too, and they were kind of like mobile. They were like mobile pastors, mobile preachers. And when the Dominicans arose, they were kind of suspicious and looked down upon. And when Thomas decided to become a Dominican, his family was scandalized because here, here was a really smart, intelligent, rich boy from Italy, and he could be at a wealthy Benedictine monastery somewhere, eventually become an abbot, own lands, go on a crusade. And here, instead of that, he's agreed to be this preacher that travels around. Now, the Dominicans ended up building houses, and they'd have churches and houses and monasteries that they'd stay in. But Dominicans, as a kind of, according to tradition, were very mobile and would move around and go where they were needed. And the Dominicans and the Franciscans were kind of part of a little reformation during the Middle Ages when there was decay at the parish level and a lot of ignorance amongst the clergy. And so Franciscans and Dominicans would kind of go and fill the gaps and re-educate the people and whatever. So he was born in Aquino, Italy, educated at Monte Cassino, which is the master house of the Benedictine order. So Benedictine monks, they take their name from Saint Benedict of Nursia from 6th century, who kind of founded monasticism as we know it. The idea of a monk who devotes his entire life to prayer and to work, lives with his other monks. They worship, 7 to 8 times a day. So he was educated in that Benedictine house, but then he also went to the University of Naples for a couple of years and then ended up flourishing at the University of Paris, which is kind of the top university of the Middle Ages. It wasn't the first university of the Middle Ages. I think Genoa was in Italy, and then a couple other Italian universities. But Paris was where you would study theology and philosophy and law. Paris was where all of the great thinkers of the High Middle Ages either taught or studied at. It was like the Duke Divinity School or the Harvard Divinity School or the University of Chicago Divinity School of the Middle Ages. Everybody went there. Everybody who was anybody went there and studied, including Thomas. And then he ended up teaching there for something like 3 years, and he took a break, and they taught there maybe 10 more years. But it was really at Paris University, and then later in Italy, as he did more of his Dominican thing, that he was writing and lecturing. And now he's generally considered to be the greatest thinker of the 13th century, so the greatest thinker of the 1200s, and also one of the most significant theologians of all time. And I have someone would pass Andrew. I got this for you. Hey, Andrew. Here, thanks. Sorry, thank you. Okay. So, one of the greatest thinkers what was I saying? One of the greatest thinkers of the Middle Ages, and one of the most significant theologians and philosophers of all time. Because not only was Thomas Aquinas a preacher, a churchman, theologian, but he was an interpreter of Aristotle and wrote many different works that were commentaries on Aristotle's philosophy. And Thomas's writing can be very difficult for a modern person to read because the entire structure of his argumentation is Aristotelian. That is, goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle, pupil of Plato, teacher of Alexander the Great, one of the great philosophers of ancient Greece, was and his contemporaries and many people consider him to be the smartest man who has ever lived, Aristotle. Where Plato was kind of more of a mystic, Aristotle was very much a realist, and he kind of divided the world into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. He didn't come up with all those, but he was the great organizer of information, Aristotle was. And he was a metaphysician and an ethicist, so he wrote about the soul, what does it mean to be, what is love, etc., etc. And Thomas took kind of Aristotle's his argument style, and then used that as kind of a grammar in his theology. So for someone who's not acquainted with Aristotle, reading Thomas can be very difficult because there are major and minor premises, syllogisms, terms like contingency, esse, other philosophical terms that are just kind of difficult to get. So today we're going to look at the Summa and Aquinas' 5 ways, but hopefully we'll be able to break it all down so that we can kind of understand the gist of what he's saying. Thomas's masterpiece is called the Summa Theologiae, also called the Summa Theologica. He wrote that 1265 to 1274. It took him 9 years to write it, and he never finished it. But it's his masterpiece, and it was kind of intended to be sort of like a college textbook for Dominicans. And before he wrote the Summa Theologiae, he wrote something called the Summa Contra Gentiles, which means a summary of theology against the unbelievers. That also took him 6 years to write, and that was more of an apologetic work. It's much more accessible than the Summa Theologiae. So you can read either of those in English translations for free on the internet if you want. If you buy the books, I mean, it's like a set, a huge set on a huge shelf. The Summa Contra Gentiles, though, is written to sort of defend the faith and kind of cover preliminary details. The Summa Theologiae gets kind of deep into theology. As I said, it was kind of meant to be a college textbook for Dominican friars who would not necessarily be getting advanced degrees in theology, but would just kind of study under Thomas. I think at Naples. He went back to Naples later in life and was just teaching Dominicans. And then they were to read the Summa Theologiae, get a good background of theology and understand Aristotle, and then go out and preach. Which is just crazy because it's one of the most complex books in Western history. It's like, along with Augustine's Confessions, and I guess I'd say along with Augustine's Confessions, it's like the most important thing ever written by a Christian. Certainly one of the most influential things ever written by a Christian. Impacted everything that happened subsequently in theology. Impacted the Reformation and the late Middle Ages that gave rise to the Reformation. And in the 20th century, there was a blossoming of Neo-Thomism, which is like, Thomas Aquinas. So Neo-Thomism is a new Thomism, or a new movement of interest in his thought and in his writings. But the Summa is actually unfinished. He never got to the last several books, because he actually had a mystical experience after which he ceased all of his writing. He actually famously said he had this mystical experience in a chapel, and afterwards he said, "All of my writing has been straw." And that could either mean straw that was used as toilet paper in the Middle Ages, or straw that is blown around by the wind and catches fire easily and is temporary and rots and is eaten by animals. So I don't know if it has the scatological, the poop meaning, but some people say that it does. So he said after that mystical experience, and he never told anyone what he saw or what happened, but he said, all of my writing is straw. And here's a man who was brilliant, respected by the entire medieval world, and then ended up just stopping his biggest project because he maybe saw the face of Christ, and he said it's not worth completing.
It sounds like Paul.
Yeah.
And all my good works, whatever I've done is...
Filthy rags, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, And Paul had a mystical experience he tells us about, right? Or he says someone, but he's referring to himself, lifted up.
Yeah.
Lifted up to heaven. But yeah, Paul, for the purpose of making converts, was still writing. But Thomas, writing in the Middle Ages, society is Christian, right? He's everywhere he goes. There's a church. Every person is a member of the church. Nominally perhaps, but in that milieu, I guess, he didn't feel that he had to keep on writing to convert people or to defend the gospel. Everybody was already a Christian. He just realized that everything he was doing was nothing compared to enjoying Christ. And then there's another famous story where Thomas had another mystical experience kind of close to this time, and he was in a chapel praying, and someone came in to look at him, and he was actually levitating. And then a voice from heaven said, "Thomas, you have written well of me. What would you have me do for you?" Or no, he said, so the voice said, I'm messing this up badly. The voice said, "Thomas, you have written well of me. What would you have?" And Thomas said, "Nothing but you, Lord." That's a pretty cool story. Yeah. That's maybe my favorite story of Thomas. What would you have? Nothing but you, Lord. That's all he wanted. So the 5 ways in the first part of the Summa, question number 2, are not intended, so what we're going to talk about, are not intended to prove God's existence to unbelievers, but to offer to believers rational support for their beliefs. So that's kind of the biggest mistake made with Thomas's arguments of God's existence, or with other arguments of God's existence, like Anselm's ontological argument, which we're not going to talk about today, or other arguments put forward by different theologians like Augustine or Leibniz later, many hundreds of years later. These people did not fool themselves into thinking that if they just came up with a watertight proof of God, everyone would believe in God and everyone would become a Christian. They did not believe that because they realized that faith is trust, and faith is necessary to have a relationship with the triune God. And they also understood that the Scriptures and the revelation in the Scriptures are gifts of God, are given by God to man, and that we don't achieve anything for ourselves. So, in other words, God has revealed that He created the world in 6 days. We don't figure that out by reason. God has created the universe at a beginning, out of nothing. We also don't gather that from experience. Based on our experience, we don't know if the universe is eternal or if it started 1 second ago. And all the memories and things you have right now are just implanted into you by God. That's not provable, but we gather that based on our faith, based on the revelation. We're a religion of revelation, not of reason alone. However, God has also given us the gift of reason, the gift of our rational human thought, in order to understand Him better, or understand His ways better. So that's the biggest mistake made with his 5 arguments. He was not trying to convert people. He did not fool himself into thinking that these were so tight that everyone in the world would become a Christian. And he also did not advocate that these were replacements for faith or replacements for the teaching of the church. He just thought that they would be helpful. And then here's a quote by the top Thomist scholar in the 20th century named Etienne Gilson. He wrote, "All of the Thomistic proofs bring 2 distinct elements into play. 1, the existence of a sensible reality whose existence requires a cause. So let's break that down. The existence of what is sensible. We can touch, we feel, we observe. Okay, we are in a sensible reality. We don't live in a computer. You're not in your dream. You're not in a dream world right now. You're not in heaven. You're in a sensible reality. In other words, the world where there are phenomena and we receive the phenomena through our senses. So that the existence of a sensible reality whose existence requires a cause. So but since we live in a sensible reality, since we live in a world and we receive through our senses, all of this stuff is not uncaused. In other words, you know, I am here standing before you because my parents got married and decided to conceive and have me, right? And then you trace them back. Where did they come from? I mean, anything here can be explained by its manufacturing process, by, you know, this came from trees originally, and then elephants, if it's ivory, whatever. Everything has some kind of a cause.
That's the problem with our science Big Bang idea of the creation of the universe. They cannot get back to a point where there was nothing. It
Right.
always starts with something, and you ask them, where did that something come from?
Yeah.
There's no answer.
Right. Right.
Somebody had to make the something.
Yeah, that's kind of Thomas's point here, but it's in several different ways. So the first distinct element in play is the existence of a sensible reality whose existence requires a cause. Number two, the demonstration of the fact that its existence requires a finite series of causes and consequently a prime cause, which is what we call God, which is basically what Alan was saying, is that, you know, my existence before you is explained by a series of finite causes. Here are my parents, my grandparents, etc., going all the way back. Well, I can't go back infinitely because by the very fact that I'm standing before you and that I'm not uncaused shows that I'm not some kind of infinite being. I'm a finite being. All right, let's get into them. This is going to be kind of just rough and tumble. No holds barred here. It's going to get we're going to go pretty deep into metaphysics, but we'll see how we do. And just to reiterate, these 5 proofs of God's existence were meant as kind of a sketch for Dominican friars in training in the Middle Ages. So Thomas probably didn't think that we'd be talking about this in 2020, and you probably didn't think we'd be talking about this in 2020. And Thomas also meant this to be kind of like an argument to play with, an argument to explore, if you will. These arguments are kind of like proving grounds for us to exercise our reason and for us to receive counter-arguments and deal with them. And also he intended these 5 ways to sort of show what God is not, almost more than showing what God is.
They support faith. They don't create faith.
Right. Yes. They support our faith. And also, I will say, so there's something in theology called negative theology. It's almost like matter, antimatter in physics. But negative theology is also called apophatic theology. And then there's something called positive theology. Positive theology is the theology of revelation. God has told us that he is love. God has told us that he sent his son. God has told us that he's triune. That is positive theology. Negative theology is uncovering all the things that God is not. God is not a body like you and me. God is not something. God is not you are not able to comprehend God. God is not finite. God is not passible. God is not changeable. God is not, etc., etc. That's what negative theology is. And so if there's one thing that the 5 proofs of God's existence help us see is that it's what God is not. And basically, Basically, all of this too flows from Exodus, from when God reveals himself in the burning bush to Moses, And God doesn't say, I'm the God of the storm, Moses, or, I'm a God who's very, very powerful. But God says, I am. I am. And none of us can say, we say, I am Adam, I am Paul, I am whomever. But our existence is a gift to us. You did not, you did not just come into existence on your own. You are not, when you die, you will no longer, your body will no longer exist. Up until 1960 or 1970 or 1989, in my case, you were not. We cannot say that about God. We can't think about him in this temporal sense that, okay, God has a birth over here, and then along the way he created stuff, and here's me in the timeline of God. God, as Thomas would say, is not a part of time. He's outside of time. God does not have a starting place and an end place. He's outside of time, and so he sees all of reality, or he sees all of human history as now. So if you look at, from Adam and Eve to 2020, God is looking at all of that in an eternal present, because he's not subject to the laws of time. He's not just some ultra-powerful being floating around here looking down on us. He's the source or the fountain, the ground of all that is. And Thomas takes as his starting point God's revelation to Moses at the burning bush, simply, I am. In other words, God is. God doesn't have existence. God exists in a way that we don't. Or even that is incorrect to say. God just is. And everything that we see, everything that exists here, including our own bodies, are partakers of that existence, that original source of existence. So, difficult to talk about. But that's negative theology, is saying what God is not. Okay, let's start with the first of the 5 ways. It's called the argument of the unmoved mover. Key concept with this argument is motion and movement. Motion and movement. A couple important terms we should discuss first from Aristotle. Potentiality and actuality. Potentiality is power capacity. Right now, because of gravity and because of my legs, I have the potentiality to jump down on the floor and make a crash. So this is dunamis in Greek. But I'm not actually doing it. So this is the potential for energy. There's energy stored in my legs, energy in the gravity, and now this is actuality. I just jumped on the floor. So that's energeia. That's the action that actually is happening. So keep that in mind. And this is actually a quote from the Summa Theologiae. So just bear with me. Let's work through it. The first and more manifest way is the argument for motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Would you agree? Would you say in the world things are in motion? Birds flying in the air, trees losing their leaves, gaining their leaves, pen flying in the air. Things are constantly in motion. And it is certain and evident to our senses, it's certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. Do you agree with that? So, is this pen going up and down because it's choosing to go up and down? It's going up and down because of, my fingers are being moved by my wrist, and the muscles in my arm are moving the fingers, going back up to my brain, and my brain was formed in my body when I was in the womb of my mother. And there's something called gravity, which Thomas didn't know about, but I mean, there's all that causation. Nothing can be put in motion except as it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion. So nothing can be put in motion potentially except by something that is putting that potential into it, or something that is a catalyst. Whereas a thing moves in as much as it is in act. This is kind of confusing, but let's keep going. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. So we would probably say that in a different way, but he's saying it in a negative way. Motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. When I was in motion jumping off the chair, my potential energy ceased, and the actual energy was engaged. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. Thus, that which is actually hot as fire makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. So wood does not become hot by itself. My body does not fall on the floor by itself. There has to be actual energy as a catalyst, actual energy that sets something in motion. If my daughter is in a wagon and she's rolling across our sidewalk, it's because something put her in motion, the actuality of her dad's push. Now, it is not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. So when I was crouched and had potential energy and then jumped on the floor to actualize it, it's impossible to have those things simultaneously as a temporal being. Either you're storing up energy or you're expending it. You can't be doing both simultaneously. For what is actually hot cannot simultaneously be potentially hot. Your hot cup of coffee, or your cold cup of coffee, is not a hot cup of coffee, but it is simultaneously potentially cold. It is therefore impossible that in the same respect and in the same way a thing should be both mover and moved. That is, that it should move itself. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. That's the big concept. Whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs be put in motion by another, and that by another again. So something that is put in motion by another. The thing that puts that thing in motion also has been put in motion by something else, right? So if you think about like a wind-up clock, okay, the clock was put in motion by the clockmaker, but that clockmaker was put in motion by something, right? He was, if you look at the muscles in his hands again and everything going to his brain, and then how he was put in motion by his father or by his mother, and then they were put in motion by their father and mother, etc., etc. But this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover. So it obviously is, it's absurd to think that, well, the reason that I'm able to push Gwen in a wagon is because there's an infinite number of movement going back into the past of actual energy, where this is just part of this long chain. In other words, at some point, my energy that allows me to actualize the potential energy comes from some kind of a source. Consequently, no other mover. Okay, but this cannot go on to infinity, because then there'd be no first mover, and consequently no other mover. So he's saying if there's no first mover, there's no mover in the now, and movement would be impossible. Seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. Andrew?
I just had kind of a question.
Yeah.
With this argument, I guess, would it fallen on itself? Because it ends by saying, like, and everyone understands this to be God. But then if it can't go to infinity, then I guess my question is, where does God come in, like, as the end result of the argument? I don't know if that makes sense. Like, in other words, God's the unmoved mover, but it's kind of like whether we're talking about the Big Bang or we're talking about an uncreated being. It's like either way, it stretches back into that infinity. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, no, I think I know what you're saying. Well, so the problem, if we use the Big Bang, the problem with the Big Bang is that's an example of potential energy spontaneously becoming potential and actual at the same time, which is an impossibility. Apart from a mover, there had to be someone to poke the Big Bang, in other words, because something that is something that is potential energy does not become actualized by itself spontaneously. And that's based on our human observation. So anything that you see moving in the world is moving because something moved it. Even if it's a magnet, you know, gravity or where it was placed or who built the magnet, right? There's always this actualizer, someone who set off the potential energy and made it actual energy. So this first is not so much about is not so much about cause, like the cause for the universe or the design of the universe or the prettiness. It's just about like just movement, just motion. Alan?
Well, to go back to his question, then that's where our faith comes in, that we accept that God always was, that he did not have a beginning, or that he does not have an end. He was always.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we come with this first mover. It's God.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, God created. We accept that by faith. Can we prove that he created it? No way. It's by faith.
Mm-hmm.
So we believe God has always been there.
Yes, and this also, I think I've probably been unclear. This argument is also coming at God's existence not from a chronological point of view, but a hierarchical point of view. So if you go back in time and say like God is the initial spark or something, then there's this chain reaction. That's not what Thomas is talking about. He's saying that here all this movement and stuff is happening because God, who is outside of time, is the actualizer. God is the one who makes energy. God is the one who sets things into motion. God is the one who actualizes potential energy, not at a point in time, but just always. God is just activity, you know, right? He's continuous activity in motion.
God knew us before we were born.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me to wrap my mind around.
Yeah. With God, I mean, with God, so many of the ways we talk about God are very inaccurate. To say that God has something is technically inaccurate because he does not. God is perfectly simple, and we say that he has this or he has that because our puny little human minds cannot comprehend that he is, and that is all that we know about God, that he is. However, he has revealed to us lots and lots about how he acts and how he loves and how he works in Israel's history, etc. But yeah, to wrap our minds around. And Thomas says that multiple times in this. He says, we can't comprehend God. Don't try. Our minds are small. And notice also that he says, this everyone understands to be God. He doesn't say, there, I've proven to you that God exists. This is kind of a sketch or a rough way of helping the Dominican friars to understand through their reason why the fact that God exists is rational. Paul?
But when you come to the idea of God and whether you believe if he exists or doesn't exist is not a yes or no, it's what you believe. So you have the choice to believe in God or not. When he says everyone understands to be what everyone understands to be God is not really accurate. Everyone does not understand that. Most of us don't.
Oh.
But your faith to say that you believe in God is a choice. It's your choice to believe in God or not believe in God. And that's what our religion is based on way back when God created the angels and everything else. There were angels who had choices. He has given us choices, and so that it's really a choice. It's not necessary for us to prove or disprove God. It's for us to make a choice based on faith that you have of creation and everything else that you are associated with.
But no one can do it without the Holy Spirit. I mean, you can't just choose to believe if you don't have the Holy Spirit.
Sure, yeah, definitely. But I would also say that, so, like talking about whether or not God exists, or do you believe in God? Can you prove God exists? It's all a very kind of modern conversation because God is outside of our argumentation, or he's not a proposition to be believed in. Like, do you believe that the lunar landings happened? Well, let's gather our evidence and look at the photographs and do, like, God is not, to say that God, like, I believe I believe that God exists kind of implies that he's, here's our world, and he's kind of floating around our world. It's not technically correct to say that he has existence, or that, it's so difficult. At the burning bush, he says, I am who I am. He simply is, and we can't even quite understand what that means, because we know he's not just a super powerful being floating around. He is the source of all energy, all life, all love, all beauty, all truth, all goodness, and everything else. Everything that we see is analogous to, that's an important word. So analogous. So there was a big debate in the Middle Ages, like, does God exist in the way that we exist? Some theologians, after Thomas said yes, Thomas said no. Our existence is analogous, just as our love or our fatherhood or anything else we can experience is analogous to God. So an analogy means that they're two separate things, but there's some similarity between them, whereby understanding one, we can understand the other. And so by understanding fatherhood or understanding love in an analogous way, we understand the love and fatherhood of God. However, the love and fatherhood of God are completely unlike, or not completely, they're radically different than our love and fatherhood that we understand. Okay, anyways, all right. Argument of the first cause. So this is the second way. This is the second way. And this actually dates back to Aristotle and the Neoplatonists, so followers of Plato in the several centuries after his death. I should say many centuries after his death. And Thomas adapted the argument for his purposes. So basically the argument is stating that the universe was caused by something uncaused. A key idea here is efficient cause, which is taken from Aristotle. So Aristotle talks about the efficient cause of something. The final cause of something would be that thing's purpose. So the final cause of carpentry is dinner that I'm eating on the table. The efficient cause of this table is the man or the machine that made it. So the efficient cause is the antecedent condition that brought a thing about. For example, the efficient cause of a boy is his father, according to St. Thomas. So everything is an efficient cause. Everything was caused by something else. You're not uncaused. If you were uncaused, you would be God, right? And same thing with all the objects you have in front of you. These were caused by something. They were made by something. There's a cause to your pen, a cause to your Bible, a cause to this basement, a cause to this earth and solar system and galaxy and universe, obviously. So here's how Thomas explains it. There is no case known, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. So the efficient cause, again, is the antecedent or the condition beforehand that brought something about. So there is no case of something causing itself to exist. For so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible, because for a thing to exist, it has to be caused. For a cause to happen, there has to be something that caused it, that initiates the cause. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes following an order, the first is the cause. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, which is what, I don't know, some proponents of the Big Bang would say, is that the Big Bang in our universe was caused by a Big Bang in the multiverse. You're just going back into infinity then. Thomas, and according to Aristotelian logic, that's impossible. There can't be just an infinite series of causes. Because in all efficient causes following in order, the first is the cause of the intermediate cause, and the intermediate is the cause to the ultimate cause. So, Gwen's existence. Let's say Gwen is the ultimate cause. I'm the intermediate cause. The first cause is that I was created. But, as an example. Or let's say the existence of, me writing with this marker. If the final cause of me drawing a picture on this board, the intermediate cause was that, this pen, or that this pen came to me down here. the first causes that this pen was created. I don't know. Those are imperfect, but now to take away the cause is to take away the effect. So if you don't have a cause, you don't have an effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. But if an efficient cause is it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause, neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. So he says, if you go back into infinity, there's no first cause, but with no first cause, you can have no intermediate cause. With no intermediate cause, you can have no final cause. So basically, if you have to go back into infinity, there would be no cause and no effect, and therefore no reality. There would be nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. As Parmenides said, ancient Greek philosopher, nothing can come from nothing. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause to which everyone gives the name of God. So, the argument of the first cause, I think, is typically kind of when we as Christians talk about like why we think God exists, I think we often talk about this cause. But notice it's different than motion, right? Motion is looking at the movement of bodies. Cause is looking at the existence of things, the existence of matter, the existence of angels, the existence of heavenly bodies, etc., etc. And Thomas is saying that if the universe is eternal, or if there is no God and everything just goes back to infinity, without having a starting point, you can have no end point. And so if we can't identify a starting point, then that means that we don't actually exist, which is obviously absurd. We take that as a premise that we exist. Everybody kind of get that one? So again, every single effect has a cause. Boom, and the cause leads to that effect. And if you don't have the cause, you don't have the effect. And there's along the way there are intermediate causes and effects that lead to a final goal. Well, in our reality, we observe that there are final goals. Let's say a person dies. So that means that he lived and that he was born and that a man and a woman created that person. Well, if you go back to infinity and you say, well, this just, came from time immemorial infinity, eventually there has to be a moment when there was that initial cause, because without a cause you can not have any effects. If you go back into infinity, there is no first cause, and everything everything falls like a house of cards. Okay, yeah, Alan.
It's like the game of marbles.
Yes.
And the bigger the shooter marble, the more effect you're going to have.
Marbles. Maybe marbles will come back one day. Wouldn't that be great? Third way, argument from contingency. So contingency is defined as something liable to happen as an adjunct to or result of something else. So I am a contingent being. Each one of you is a contingent being because you have happened as a result of something else happening. Okay? So there's a presupposition here with the argument from contingency. It's that the existence of a being is not necessary. It is a possibility. Jim's existence is not necessary. Sorry, you're unnecessary, Jim. No, your existence was always possible in the loins of your father. Your existence was always possible. That's how Thomas would talk. The possible cannot account for its own existence. If there were only possibility, there would be no things. So if there is no actual existence, but only possible existence, there would be no things to think about possible existence. I mean, your existence is not necessary. There's always there's a possibility to your existence. And here's what Thomas says. The third way is taken from possibility and necessity and runs thus. We find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated and to corrupt, and consequently they are possible to be and not to be. So there is possible to be me, but it's also possible that I am going to die or that I never would have existed in the first place. But it is impossible for these always to exist, for that which is possible not to be at some time is not. So before my parents made me, I did not exist, right? It was possible for me to not exist before I did not exist. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. So not just humans, but any rock, any tree, any table, any marker, every single thing that you can see in the world, in the universe, has this possibility of existence. So a star in the nighttime sky does not have to be there. It has been, it's come into existence. And Thomas didn't know about how stars are born and how stars die and go into supernova and etc. But the star can die. That's the important thing. And anything that can die and disintegrate is a contingent being, right? Like we are, or a rock, or anything. Now, if this were true, even now there'd be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. So that which exists only comes into existence by something that is already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. And thus, even now, nothing would be in existence, which is absurd. Therefore, not all things are merely possible, but there must exist something, the existence of which is necessary. God. But every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another or not. Now, it is impossible to go on to infinity in necessary things which have their necessity caused by another, as has been already proved in regard to efficient causes. Therefore, we cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity. This all men speak of as God. So that is the argument from contingency. So what he's saying is that everything else that you see, including your own body, including who you are, is not a necessity, right? It is not a necessity that a rock exists. It does exist because the right minerals came together, and with pressure and heat and time, a rock was made. But it doesn't have to be there. If the ingredients weren't there, there would be no rock. Well, what about the ingredients? Does carbon just pop into existence just out of itself, or does something have to happen for carbon to be created? Well, yeah, carbon is contingent on the right atomic pattern of whatever, and you can look at anything in our life, and you can basically break it down like that, whether it's a rock or a man. And Thomas is saying there's all this potentiality for existence, but there has to be something that is before everything else, something that precedes, that is necessary in order for there to be potentiality.
He's basically saying that the only explanation is God.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, he is. You have a good way of kind of summarizing, Ellen, and just clarifying. Thank you. So the fourth way is the argument from degree, which is also called the henological argument, from the Greek word hen, which means one, or it's called the argument from the gradation of being. So I like this argument. This argument can be traced back to Aristotle and Plato, and Plato's heir, Plotinus, who wrote a book called the Aeneids, and Plotinus often speaks about the one, and by the one he did not mean a god or a powerful being. He meant God who underlies all of reality, God who's the source of all that is. But its medieval proponent was Anselm, who we talked about a couple weeks ago. This argument goes through the hierarchical degrees of perfection observed in things. So often, let's use beauty as an example, okay? So how is it that you're able to look at something like this and say, this is less beautiful than, I don't know, let's say I draw a perfect circle Famously, Giotto, the early Renaissance painter, people came up to Giotto and said, "Can you prove to us that you're the greatest artist in the world?" And he just took his chalk and he drew a perfect circle on the wall, flawless, completely symmetrical in every respect, and it left everybody speechless. And everybody later said, yeah, he is the greatest artist because no man can draw a perfect circle except Giotto. But would it be safe to say that this is just kind of ugly and random, and this is more uniform and more beautiful? Maybe not beautiful, but let's make a beautiful flower, okay? Okay. Would it be safe to say that a scribble is less beautiful than a flower?
It's perception, though.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Would you say that's true? I mean, generally you could say, like, looking at people, some people find someone like David Bowie to be attractive. Some people find David Bowie to be very ugly. But generally saying, I mean, would you say that looking at the parking lot of the ranch is just as beautiful as being in the Alps and looking at Mont Blanc? What about looking at the floor of Schmitty's bar in the back of the ranch? Is that as beautiful as the small tile mosaic floor that is in Ravenna, Italy, in the baptistry there from the 7th century? I mean, you would be, you know, we would say nowadays, people would say, yeah, that's beautiful. But nowadays, art, it consists of like an art piece, a very famous art piece. I don't remember the artist, but this was in the 80s, I think. She put her bed in the art gallery, made it really disheveled, put some gross stuff on the floor, like, I don't even need to say, gross stuff on the floor involving her sexuality, and then that was the art project. That was her piece of art. How can that be compared to Da Vinci, Michelangelo? I mean, how can it be? We would say no one in their right mind truly believes that everything is completely subjective. In certain instances, yes, right? There's kind of a, like, that's why there's argument about painters. Is Giotto a better painter than Cimabue or some other medieval painter, Renaissance painter? Well, there's some debate there, but we can say that the floor of Schmitty's bar in the back of the ranch is not as beautiful as a small tile mosaic masterpiece in Italy. So how can we say that? Well, it's because there are degrees of beauty, and if the floor of the bar at the ranch has a very, very low amount of beauty, a mosaic floor in Italy has a very high amount or degree of beauty. Also, you can look at, you can look at people's faces. Martin Luther is not the most attractive theologian. I would say, I don't know who the most attractive theologian. Let's say that Saint Ambrose was just had a great beard and was a very, strong Italian man. We'd say Saint Ambrose is more beautiful than Martin Luther. His face is more perfect. Or think about a Greek sculpture, right? Think about a Greek sculpture compared to, here's my drawing of a person. Okay? Is that more beautiful than the face of a Greek sculpture? No, it's not. Or think about this, okay? So that's beauty, but let's think about goodness. A poor person, a panhandler in the street asks for some money, and I say, all I have is change. And I'm lying. I have more than change, but I just give her, and I can tell she's in need, and let's say I know her backstory, and I know that she needs money, and she's not going to go buy booze. So I give her some change. It would be a little bit better, wouldn't it, if I got out and was like the Good Samaritan and helped her in some way. It might even be better than that if I brought her somewhere in town where she could get a job or get help or give her resources. There are degrees in goodness, in how helpful you are and how good something is. And that all of this has to do with this argument. So there are degrees in goodness, truth, nobility, and other perfections in being. Now, more or less are always said with reference to a term of comparison, which is absolute. So how are we able to say that the floor of the bar in the ranch is not as beautiful as the floor, the mosaic floor Oh, could you call?
I tried calling Lisa.
You tried calling Lisa?
Yeah,
Okay.
They've been there they're getting a little anxious. I think
Oh.
they jump over your fence.
Oh, that's. Could you actually say, "Go ahead and jump over my fence"? Could you tell them?
Are you serious?
Yeah, just say, "Yeah, guys, jump over. It's fine."
Okay, I don't think they can, but.
Okay, I can. So how is it that we're able to say, like, objectively speaking, this floor is not as beautiful as this floor, or this flower, or this face is not as beautiful as a sculpted face of a Greek, artist? Well, it's because there's something that is absolute. There's an absolute idea of beauty, or there's an absolute beauty that exists in God, as we would say. So here's what Thomas says. The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. Among things there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like, but more and less are predicated on different things, according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum, as a thing is said to be hotter, according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest, so that there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest, and consequently something which is uttermost being. Now, for those things that are greatest in truth and greatest in being, as it is written in Metaphysics 2. Now, the maximum in any genus is the cause of all in that genus, as fire, which is the maximum of heat, is the cause of all hot things. Therefore, there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness and every other perfection. This we call God. I've kind of already explained that. The fact that we can judge varying degrees of beauty means that there must be some ultimate example of that which is purely beautiful, and we would say that is, in a hierarchical sense, that is God. So, at the very bottom of beauty would be the ranch parking lot. A little bit higher than that might be like the old buildings in our downtown. Higher than that, something else. We go all the way up, and we find like the prime example of architecture, shadow, angle, structure, light, and we say all those things we can judge to be beautiful because they are approaching in an analogous way the beauty that only resides in God, or the highest beauty that is in God. Okay. Then finally, the argument from final cause, a teleological argument from Greek word telos, which means end or goal. This is a long-established argument, and you can actually kind of grasp a little bit of this in Romans chapter 1. In a modern sense, this argument has a finely tuned universe as its premise. Heavenly bodies are without intelligence, and yet they have a regularity by which they achieve their goal. Someone has to know that goal for them. How do electrons know that they're supposed to turn in an electron cloud around a nucleus? How does the moon know to turn around the Earth, and the Earth know to revolve around the sun, etc., etc.? There are all these non-living beings that nevertheless have fine-tuning. And Thomas was not a modern physicist. He didn't understand, he was before Copernicus even. He doesn't understand science as we do. But even if you're a modern scientist and you say, well, the electrons are in an electron cloud because there's no other way for electrons to exist, you're just kind of pushing the causation back, or you're just deferring the question later. Why is it impossible for electrons or a nucleus, atoms, quarks, molecules, whatever, to have that structure, that pattern? Why? And why is it a pattern that we find everywhere in nature? Why is there a finely tuned universe? Well, Thomas would say that question leads you to the fifth way. So here's what he writes. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end, and this is evident from their acting always, or nearly always, in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously, but designedly do they achieve their end. Now whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end, unless it be directed by some other being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, is it any more wonderful that I'm able to hit this shot? Let's say it went in. As it is that the earth moves in such a beautiful way around the sun, or such a regular way, let's say, or that any of the particles and atoms that we observe in our universe have such a regularity. Is it any more beautiful than a perfect shot or a perfect arrow? Thomas would say, well, no, of course not. It's only our modern secular mindset that says, no, there's a big difference. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. I think we probably should end.